Hello and welcome to Conversations with Kendall. I am just super excited. We've got some special guests here today. And at the end of this podcast, make sure you subscribe and like. And I'm going to give you some information during this podcast that you're going to want to hang on to and watch to the end because we're going to talk about a lot of different topics. I have with me today the Superintendent of Sarasota County Schools, Mr. Terry Connor. What a privilege, man.
Good afternoon. Good to see you. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. And thank you for being here. Some of you may not know Terry if you don't have kids in school, but Terry is a premier superintendent of schools here. And I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about his background. But just to make sure you understand the volume of his impact here in Sarasota, he's in charge of about 45,000 students.
That's correct.
Here
yes.
in Sarasota County. And from what I've read, in charge of the #1 ranking of school systems in Florida.
Yeah, it really depends on what you're looking at in terms of ranking. But from an academic standpoint, Sarasota County is an extremely high-performing school district, and we're continuing to reach new heights every year. So one of the major focuses since my arrival about 19 months ago has really been about putting in an instructional system in place to really help our teachers flourish in the classroom, giving them the right resources, making sure they have those high quality, standards aligned lessons to support students as they learn our very rigorous standards that we have here in Florida. So that's been probably the bulk of the priorities is around high quality instruction, and then fine tuning some of the great things we're already doing here in Sarasota.
Yeah. I mean, and you not only did you doing a great job here. I mean, obviously #1. But you came out of, tell us about your background, where you came from and how you ended up, what's your journey to this point?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I never saw myself as a superintendent until you kind of lead that path as I took on different roles. But I started as a middle school science teacher teaching 7th graders straight out of college. I actually majored in education. I majored in math and science education, and started teaching that first year 7th graders, and then after 2 years of that, they asked me to go to 8th grade. I taught 8th grade for 2 years, science as well, and then that just really led me into an administrative leadership pathway because I had a principal who really mentored me and said, you really have the qualities to lead, and they needed a department chair the very first year I started teaching, so I got kind of thrust into that. It's a little bit different than managing a classroom full of students and then leading adults. But I got my taste of that and enjoyed it, was a part of the leadership team, and he gave me a lot of experiences, and that led me to an opening at the school where I taught at as an assistant principal. And I served in that role there for about 4 years. And that's a little bit challenging because you develop really great relationships with your colleagues as teachers, and then you're kind of put into a leadership
In charge of
role.
them, right?
Yeah, and so that dynamic shifted a little bit, but it was great learning opportunity, and I got to stay at the school where I began my career. What's interesting about that is
And you were probably a very young assistant principal at that time.
I was 26 when I became an assistant principal,
Wow.
and then I became a principal of the school.
Same school.
Same school. He actually retired and really made it his mission to try to get me to be his successor, and it worked out. And so I got to lead at that school for 2 years as the principal before the district said, we're going to need you at a high school. And I became a high school principal in Duval County. So I'm just 250 miles northeast is where home base is for me. So
Right.
Jacksonville's where I grew up.
Wow.
I should have started with that. But Jacksonville is where all my family's from. My wife, that's where I met her, and our family is all from there. And so moving into the high school realm, I served there for about 4 years at a high school called Wolfson High School in Duval County. And what a great experience, Title I experience. So I've had the best of all worlds from schools that are non-Title I and Title I schools. And for those who may not know, those are really based on the socioeconomic makeup of your school. So a Title I classification would be a school that has more poverty. You're serving students more in the higher percentage of poverty. And that comes with challenges, right? Some of the support mechanisms that they may not have at home.
Right.
Are
Including
things,
breakfast to start with.
right, breakfast and food and things of that nature. So just all of that experience really just really prepared me to take on a district level role. And that's where I transitioned after about 4.5 years at the high school level. And I served as the chief academic officer and principal supervisor in a county right next to Duval, which is Clay County.
Right.
So if you're familiar with Green Cove Springs and Orange Park, and that school district mirrors very much what Sarasota is. It's about 43 schools in Clay County, about the same number of students, about the same demographic makeup. So it was a great place to really cut my teeth
to launch, right?
Yeah, and into district leadership.
Yeah.
So I got to serve very closely with the superintendent, learn and shadow him, and learn so much with working with boards and all of that good stuff that you have to do in terms of not just instruction, but the entire operation of a school district. And then he decided, as the superintendent at the time decided, he wanted to apply for the Hillsborough superintendency that was open at the time in 2020. So he got that job right there at the beginning of January of 2020. He started the job and really had asked me to come as his deputy superintendent. And that was a big jump for me because now we're going to move the family. It was going to be
Coast.
uprooting
Right.
for us. And we made the jump over to Hillsborough. And I started in March of 2020. So we all know what happened in March of 2020. So it was COVID.
Yep.
So we learned a lot through that. But Hillsborough, I served in that role for 3.5 years as the deputy superintendent, right alongside the superintendent. And that so many great things I learned working in a very large school district, as you know, 7th largest in the nation, over
Right.
235,000 students and 260 schools. So you've got Duval County, 20th largest in the nation. You got Clay County, very similar to Sarasota. I've worked in Hillsborough, very, very large school district. So just a multitude of experiences that really, I think, prepared me to take on the role as a superintendency. And at the time I decided, I really didn't know that I wanted to be a superintendent at that time until I saw the vacuum that was created. The year that 2023, Florida had 16 superintendent openings at any given point in that year.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of turnover. And so I made the decision.
Was that a lot of these folks retiring post-COVID? Or?
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics that led to that. And it was a stressful time coming out of after the pandemic.
After COVID. And it wasn't just in teaching and administration and so on. You have plumbers, you have doctors, you have a lot of folks saying enough's enough and
Yes.
starting to retire. That maybe the old baby boomers hitting that age or something. So
Yep.
a lot of openings. Wow.
Yeah, so that really what kind of drove me into looking for I believe I have the capabilities to be a superintendent, and with so many openings, I decided to jump in, and I landed in Sarasota, and I couldn't be more blessed to be here.
And here you are. And not only did you go to all these places, but you took, from what I read, you took Hillsborough County which is Tampa, essentially.
Tampa, yes.
35th in the state as far as scoring, school scores and so on, to about 19th.
We did in 2 years, and under the stress of COVID too, which was a very challenging time for everyone, right? Just learning how to operate remote learning, and
That's
you
a
had mask and no mask. You had a lot of controversies, things that were going on at that time, and Hillsborough was in a pretty bad way with 28 schools that were on the lowest performing list in the state of Florida, highest number of schools than any other county in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And we were able to, with the great team that was there, there's a very talented people in Hillsborough County that when we got coordinated and concentrated on the work, despite all of the distractions, we were able to reduce it from 28 DNF schools down to 4 in
Wow.
2 years. So it was
That's
great.
amazing. So how many school districts are there in Florida?
Well, there's 60. We're a county-based
Right.
state, so all of the school districts are county-driven. So there's 67 school districts.
67.
And then there's some lab schools and virtual schools. The Florida Virtual School would be considered a district as well. But yeah, say 67.
So you took Tampa, Hillsborough from out in the middle of the pack to top 19. I mean, that's top 30%. So from 50% to 30% within a couple of years, very quickly. And again, I understand what you're saying too. It's not just one man, and for any school district, it's a school board, it's the teachers, it's the parents, it's the dynamics at any school in any county is far bigger than one person. But one person's leadership helps all those other folks just jump on board and drive that train forward. I just did a phenomenal job. We're going to talk about also all of Florida and Sarasota in particular, the rankings of those and so on, how far they've come. But let me stop for just one moment here. Now, you met your wife in Jacksonville. You went to college together.
No, I actually just met her through a group of friends. Actually, I was in my 20s and we met.
Teaching?
Well, here's the ironic thing. She was a teacher and I was going into my first assistant principalship, but we didn't meet really through education. We didn't meet at a school or we didn't meet at a school function or event. We just met through friends. But the connection really was we both were educators, so that was how
Something
we hit
to
it
talk
off.
about.
Yeah.
Nice. And then you moved and married kids and moved them all down here to Sarasota. The Every Student Every Day initiative. Tell me about that. What that means to you and to the state, or is that just Sarasota County?
Well, I know that term has every student every day was really, from my understanding, it was originated by Wilma Hamilton, who used to be a previous superintendent here. But it really does just encapsulate what we are about in Sarasota County. So it was something that I took and just continued to push forward. Sometimes superintendents come in and they make a bunch of changes, and I've had my share of changes that we've made structurally to how we operate. But that was one thing that I saw that we were like, that really does hit the point of why we're here and do what we do in Sarasota County schools, is to make sure that every student has what they need to be successful every single day. And so that is the driving force. And we try not to just make it a platitude or a catchphrase, but really, when we're making decisions, how does it impact students?
Right.
It's one of the reasons why I'm very diligent about getting into the front lines and getting into schools and shadowing different job roles within the county, because I need to know that the decisions we're making in the boardroom or at the cabinet level or how they're affecting our students. Yeah. And so we try to live by that motto each and every day.
That's a good. I mean, it's a good model, because you have, like I said, 45,000 students out there, and boy, even if 10% of them were left behind, that's 4,000 kids.
It is. And so when you really put the numbers and attach the numbers to it, you don't want your student or your child to be one of those. So
let alone 4 kids, but 4,000 would be a lot. So as I did some research, and after I met you, and I've gone to some of your coffees with Connor and talked to you, and I was blown away. I mean, I moved down here 20 years ago, Port Orange area, and you didn't move to Florida back then because they have these fantastic schools. You moved for the weather, you moved for the beach, and we'll put up with the school systems. We'll make it do, especially coming out of some of the I came out of suburbs of Chicago and Naperville area and so on. Some of those nice areas that have great schools, pay a lot of taxes for that, but it was often the folks who came down here were retirees. They didn't want to pay for schools. They left that behind. So I get why there was maybe a deficiency in some of the programs, the money coming into the programs. But wow, and I mean wow, the numbers I've seen now is not only is Sarasota the number 1 ranked school system, Sarasota County in Florida, and some would say, well, it's 2, but if you take out the charter schools, I mean, you're number 1. I mean, this is it. Not only that, and I asked you about this before we met for coffee. I said, well, how do we rank across the country? And you said, well, it all depends, and go on niche, go on this, and find out, whatever. But I'm sorry, everything I came up with was that Florida is now number 1 in education, the whole state, across the whole United States, and 9th overall, but number 1 in education. That's amazing. From where you came back you were 35th in education and 28th overall back in 2000. So in the last 25 years, but with folks coming down here with children or having children when they move down here, and this becoming more of a family state, instead of just going to Disney World and going back home, people are moving here, and you've gone from 35th in education out of 50 states to number 1 in the state.
Yeah, I do believe that's a lot of the concentration of our legislatures that really have made that a big priority of the legislative session around whether it you're dealing with accountability measures, because we do know that as much as we may not like the word accountability, there's a lot of stress that goes in that, but that accountability raises the bar. And with the expansion of school choice and parents having the option to choose now where to send their child, no longer are we tied to the old feeder pattern where you go to this elementary school and that goes to this middle school and that goes to this
Right.
high school. You have choices. And so I think that competitive spirit has to come into play, just much like the business world, right? If you're not competitive and you're not giving a product that families want, then you're not going to survive. And so that's the mentality that we use, is that we are a people business. So we have to continue to cultivate the people, value the people who operate, the teachers that are in the classroom every day doing the hard, heavy lifting to educate students with all the complexities that exist nowadays, in making sure that they're given the right tools, the best tools to do the job, and giving parents choice in options, because your child may be artistic, your child may be more STEM minded, they
Right.
like the sciences and technology. We've got to continue to innovate our programming, our pathways, to ensure that students can enter relevant fields that are going to be impactful to our community. And we can't just kind of rest on our laurels. So that competitive edge is really, really important in this day and age. And I think we're hyper focused on that to ensure that what are we doing in each one of our schools so that parents want to choose us, because they can choose a charter school or a private school or
Right.
homeschool. There's so many different options. And that competitiveness makes you better each and every year.
Yeah, it was amazing when I heard that, because I would never have thought Florida is, if you got the top 10, that's great. But number one in education in Florida, and again, like you said, it's you getting the right tools to the teachers, and the right teachers teaching, and the right parents involved, because they can teach all they want. If they go home and just they have terrible home lives, or they don't work at home or study at home or whatever, then the dynamics, it's a puzzle. I mean, all these pieces have to fit together. So I think folks that are moving down here have that mindset. They want the best schools, and they're getting them. They are actually getting them, from what I read. And the budget. Let's talk about the budget a little bit, real quick. I'm going to go back to as far as the what we're teaching, and how you're teaching it, and so on. But the budget here, if I read that correctly, about $30 billion for the state. Is that about right?
I couldn't quote on the state. I could talk about Sarasota
Sarasota
County.
was at 1 point.
Well, $1.5 billion dollars
Yes.
to Sarasota County
Sarasota.
schools. And that's made up of a lot of different categoricals, right? We get money for building and construction. We get money for specific things that we have to fund. We run about over $500 million on what we call our general operating. That's going to pay for our teachers. That's going to pay for a lot of the day-to-day things that we do to ensure that we have those resources in the classroom. And
That was going to be my next question. How much of that goes to teachers? So you're saying out of the 1.5, 0.5 goes to staff.
yeah, mostly that's just on the what we call general operating. And so included in that is the referendum. And this community for the last 20 plus years has been a huge proponent of education by supporting a referendum every 4 years.
Yes.
And right now, that referendum just this past year was about $109 million that we got in
Through
1 year.
millage.
Through the millage,
Yeah.
through the 1 mil that we got. And that makes a tremendous impact on a school district. It allows us to really do those innovative things and to attract high quality teachers. One thing that you may hear a lot of in the headlines is teacher pay. We don't pay teachers enough, right? We take a lot of what that millage has brought, what it brings in, and we put it towards salaries so that we can keep and retain and attract new teachers to our school district, and making sure that we have the best and brightest in our classrooms. And I'm really proud to say that, next school year, we're going to be one of only 2 districts currently that have a $60,000 salary, a starting salary for our teachers. And we do have the highest in the state of Florida. Our average teacher salary is the highest of all 67 counties.
It is. Okay. I looked at that online too, and I thought, boy, you're the number 1 county, but you were in the top 5. Maybe now it's bumped up to number one. So that's good to know. And I saw the number, and you can look this up online. This is nothing. These are public record to look up teacher salaries.
Right.
And yeah, I saw a starting salary of 60,000 and up to 100,000 or more if they have a master's or whatever.
Absolutely.
And that that struck me as not being bad. And of course, teachers are going to hate me for saying this, but you think of the old days and teachers are making 30,000, 40,000 maybe, which was terrible, underpaid. And you look at it, well, if you start out at 60 grand, that's not too bad. One of the complaints I did hear about was some of these teachers are maybe making 60,000 now, and a brand new one comes in 2 years later and makes 60,000.
Yeah.
How do you fix that? Are there incentives, or is there some way for that teacher who's been making 60,000 for 2 years not to get paid the same as a newbie?
Yeah. Well, and that's been a challenge because the legislature and our governor has really pushed in and allocated a lot of funding for starting salaries. And so the challenge that we've had is, okay, we need additional funding to put some more funding towards our veteran teachers.
Right.
And so we work very closely with our collective bargaining team to try to create that parity the best we can. But I will say that compression has been created somewhat when you talk about lifting up the bottom and then not being able to lift those that have been in the system quite as high as you have the bottom, creates that compression. And so our challenge and our priority when we meet as a bargaining team and we're at the table is to talk about how do we create parity so that we don't have that frustration. And we've addressed it in the best we can with the funding that we have, but I think there's more to do in that area. So I think in the future that may be even a more priority of maybe we don't push as much on the starting salary, but we look at how
you nailed that. So that's
the problem is you're in constraints with some of I talked about how you get allocated funds from the state for a specific purpose. And that's the challenge sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, also across the country, I mean, even Florida teachers are paid near the bottom. Sarasota may be in the top 5 of the state, but overall, I think across the country, it's near the bottom. And for now, the number one school ranking, from what I've read, gosh, I mean, you would think about the quarterback of a Super Bowl team, he wants to get paid number one. So yeah, that's maybe a challenge we have to address going down the road too. If we are number one in the state, shouldn't our teachers get paid number one? Now I know cost of living sometimes in New York City, Manhattan, or LA might be more. I get that, but I was pleasantly surprised. Like you said, you had a starting salary of 60 grand. I said, boy, that's not bad.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely more to do.
Yes.
You know, it's good to say we're at the top, but that doesn't mean there's not more work to be done. And I would agree teachers need to be paid as much as we can pay them because honestly, they are the key to the future. If we don't have good quality teaching in our schools, no amount of curriculum, no amount of programs you put in place without that teacher there to really help and foster that learning, it doesn't happen. So as much as we can pay teachers, I'm all for that.
All for that, that's right. And I substitute teach sometimes, and I signed up for that gig because I wanted to see how my kids are doing. I mean, and what happens in that class, and what can I do to help? And it's not like I'm doing this for the pay, but it's just to get involved and to the deepest level I can. And I was like, I came out of there my first day of sub-teaching, and I was like, wow, they don't get paid enough. That was my whole thing, like, not enough. And this was kindergarten, by the way. This is not even.
That might be the toughest grade level, actually.
It may be. But I really felt empathy for these teachers, and they need to get paid well. And not only that, but more parents, and I'm going to talk about touching that a moment here, get involved, boy. Encourage all parents to get involved, either volunteer in the classrooms, get in the PTOs, substitute teaching, which is not difficult to do. You sign up, you get fingerprinted, you get in there, you get engaged, help out. That was one of the reasons I got involved too, is I heard some teachers say, boy, we can't get enough substitutes. I can't take a day off. No one can cover my class. I said, why, Joel, why not? And it's not that hard to do it. It's a tough day, but it's a fun day because you're working with kids and see what your teachers are up against. So um, that was one of my efforts too. So get involved. If you're a parent, don't just drop the kid off and drive away and same pickup line after school and pick them up and drive away. There's so much going on in these schools. I mean, from the janitor all the way up to the principal, everything in between that makes these schools wonderful and number one in the country. And even if they weren't number one or two or three, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of activity going on there, a lot of learning. And I think to help out as a parent, the most you can do is to plug in.
Absolutely. I would say it's always important to remember that we have them about 6 hours of the day, and the parents have them for the rest of the time. So this is really a collaboration and a partnership, and it's not all on the parents, it's not all on the school, and we've got to work together. And I would say parent involvement, even at home, right? Making sure that you're checking to make sure kids are reading consistently throughout the week. They're doing their homeworks, they're doing their assignments, checking in with the teacher, and continuing to have those conversations, even if you're not physically at the school volunteering, is so important to stay engaged. Making sure you know what your child's doing on their cell phones, making sure, checking on that social media. That a lot of times bleeds over into school.
Right.
And so we want to make sure that just that whole 360 accountability. And then when you're talking to the teachers, figuring out what you can do to help them, right? That's always important as well. I love the fact that you're substituting. That's a great way, an intense way to be involved.
It is.
But there are so many small ways that parents can remain engaged in their child's education that really does support the teacher, and it makes their jobs just that much easier when the parents are just connected to what's going on day to day.
And by doing that also, and plugged in, you start to realize that you have, like, let's say you have 6 kindergarten classes at any given school, and every teacher has their own personality. And you may have the same curriculum, but how they teach it and their personality, you can start to see, where would my son or daughter fit in well? Does my son or daughter need a little bit more TLC? Mrs. A is good at that, or do I need some more discipline? And so you could really plug your kids in the best way by knowing and getting to know these teachers and their styles. And they're all great, and they're all needed.
That's right.
It's not like one's better than the other. It's where's your kid fit in best.
That's a perfect thing. The more you can interact and be at the schools to interact with the adults and kind of see that dynamic, it really does make a difference for you and when you're having conversations about potential placement for your students. So
so it's not so much the school. Boy, I can have school choice and go anywhere school. Well, what about within that school? And the micro piece of that is not. It's not just Sarasota's great. Okay, Sarasota's got a wide range of schools here. You're number one in the state. But there's one elementary school that helps make that number one, and there's one that's dragging it down a little bit, and there's 4 or 5 in between. But doesn't mean one's worse than the other. It's just, and how do you make that bottom school up a little bit more? I don't know, but there's a lot of dynamics in all of this, which I just found fascinating. All right, so speaking of that, now let's talk about curriculums. How does curriculums come down to Sarasota? How does it come down to Tatum Ridge? How does it come down? Who decides curriculum?
Sure.
And who implements that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and sometimes I think people have ideas about how that's done, but there really is a lot of oversight in curriculum choices. We go through what's called an adoption cycle every year, and the state actually defines what subjects are going to be adopted during what years. So we recently just completed our science adoption, and we approved that purchase last maybe 2 board meetings ago. In the state, what they do is they do a call to publishers to bid to get on the state bid list, and so they go through a vetting process at the state level. Once those publishers are cleared and vetted and make it to the short list, then districts can adopt right off of that list. And we typically, those are going to be your big publishers that are typically, across K-12, across the nation in different states. And so from that list, it's a really good starting point for school districts. So most school districts in Florida are going to start with that list. It's not that they can't go off of that list. They can. They're just going to have to go through a different vetting process.
So you have companies out there, and I don't know the names. This is something I pay more attention to. I look at those books now, and who wrote them and who they're published by. But let's say it's Crawford and Smith. and 5 others like that are publishing material for science.
That's right.
And you look at those 5, and how do you pick one?
Well, the first thing we got to understand is that we're responsible for teaching the Florida standards.
Okay, so
that's
it starts with this. Okay,
Starts with the standards, right? And then how we teach the standards and what curriculum choices we make there, we have a lot of flexibility in that. But primarily what school districts do is they start off of that state bid list, and then they have their own vetting process. So they may take those 5 publishers, and now at the local level, we form a committee here of teachers, science teachers, parents, administrators, all come together who have a vested interest in science and maybe expertise in science. And they look at the materials to see what's the best fit for us out of the 5. What resources do they offer? They may have some ancillary or supplemental resources. Does it cover the standards very well? Are there gaps in the curriculum where, and no one curriculum is going to be perfect, right? You're going to have to figure it out through some supplemental resources. But that team does a really good job of vetting and deciding for us what are going to be maybe our top 3 out of the 5. And then we put it out to the entire voting population. So if like in the science case, it went to all science teachers in the district, and then they got to review the materials at their school sites, and then over a 30-day period, they could then submit a survey response saying, this is what I'd like to vote for as our number 1 choice. And then we look at that data, and typically we're going to go with whatever the teachers decide, and that's what we bring forth as a recommendation to the public and to the board. And the public has the opportunity to be a part of this process. So anyone can look at those materials at any given time that we're going through it.
Do they vote on it? So you have a 5-member board?
5-member board. And typically what I'll do is, as the superintendent, I bring the recommendation to the board and say, this is what our teachers have decided. This is what the superintendent agrees with. This is what our teams have ultimately selected as our number 1 choice. And it's gone through multiple layers of vetting to get to that point.
And then the board votes, but what if you have 50 parents at that meeting, do they vote as well, or is it just the board members?
The parents and the public have an opportunity through a public hearing to speak about the materials, whether they're in favor or they're not in favor of it for whatever reasons. And the board listens to all of the public comments during the hearing, and that could have a factor in determining whether that's the right fit for us.
And the board is voted from the public as well. So if they didn't like some of the decisions, they could vote them off in 2 years or 4 years, I think it is, or something. Sure. So that sounds like it's all working well. But so at the state level, though, they come up with the curriculum guidelines, and then you try to find a good match for that. Now, does it vary? You said locally, Sarasota maybe has something different than Hillsborough does. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
That's right. And that doesn't preclude us from building our own curriculum. For instance, if there was a particular course that we thought that we had great expertise, that we could pull a team of teachers together to create curriculum for that course, we absolutely have the ability to do that as well as supplemental materials. We're able to bring things outside of those publishers into the classroom if it is properly vetted and approved. We have a process for that to ensure that things are aligned to the standard, that there's no objectionable materials are in there.
Right.
So all of that goes through a vetting process before it is delivered in instruction.
And who at the top level, who at the state level sets those standards?
Well, the State Board of Education actually votes on approving those standards. But
okay,
it
across
goes
the whole state.
Right. They go through a process of developing those standards and vetting them as well, just kind of like you do with your instructional materials. And then once those standards get to the final stage and they're ready to be voted on, the state board will vote on them.
Okay, so then that takes me to the next question. Now, so the state's doing a lot of the work here, and we keep hearing that word state. So dismantling Department of Education, what does that do? Or what's good, what's bad?
So you have the federal Department of Education, which is in the news a lot recently.
Right.
And you have the state Department of Education.
I mean the federal.
Yeah. So at the federal level, you have an executive order that just was signed to begin dismantling that. For us, I think the implications that we're really watching right now is making sure the funding mechanisms that support things like funding for students with disabilities, funding for Title I schools. There's different pots of money or grants that we get from the federal government that flow through, usually through the state to the school districts, the National School Lunch Program. All of those in Sarasota County amount to roughly $50 million.
Okay.
Whether it's the school lunch, Title I, when you put it all together, it's about $50 million that we get in federal funding. And so for us, we're watching very closely of, okay, if they're going to be moving it, whether it's Health or Human Services, or they're going to move it over to a different Department of Treasury, whatever they're going to move it, we just want to make sure that we're not negatively impacted in the amount of support and resources for our students, because we've come to really leverage those to do what we need to do to support, whether it's students with disabilities or English language learners or our Title I schools. All of those are very, very important to us. So that's, for us, mainly, if the belief is that it's going to be a cost containment strategy for dissolving that physically, the buildings and all that up there, that so much is not more of the impact that I'm looking at than I am the funds that flow to Sarasota County that we use to leverage and support our students.
So out of the 1.5 billion Sarasota budget a year, you're saying about 50 million only? Only 50 million comes from the feds?
We get about 50 million, which is,
big number.
It's a very, it's a big number. It has a very large impact on what we do. But when you think about our entire budget,
right,
a very small percentage.
Yeah.
But every dollar does matter.
And I don't think that would, I haven't seen the whole recommendation here, but I don't think the money would stop flowing. In fact, maybe if they find a way to eliminate some of the waste and so on, maybe more money available. But so that's really what's flowing through Department of Education from the federal level to the state. And I've heard that too. So for those programs, if that keeps coming, then there's not much of a change that's going to happen.
Yeah,
I mean, does the federal level affect how you make decisions in the state?
Well, the state has to abide by certain criteria. The Every Student Succeeds Act was the last major educational legislation federally that states are held accountable to. So does that law change, or if Congress changes some of the aspects of that law, then that will change what the Department of Education does here at the state level, which then trickles down to the local school districts, right, and how we do. And currently under that law, there are some requirements that we look at to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all student populations. And so we have what's called a federal index criteria that we look at for each of our populations. So for instance, students with disabilities, one of the things I noticed is we had a lot of schools not making enough progress with our students with disabilities. We made a huge concentrated effort. We brought in an external evaluator to look at how we do all of our ESE, our special education programming. Right. Gave us recommendations. We began implementing those very quickly when I came on board, and we were able to eliminate a lot of schools. I think we had 11 schools that we eliminated off that federal index criteria for students with disabilities in 1 year because of that measure. And so that's an implication, though the feds do have that accountability measure that, it does have an impact on what we do each and every day. Now, we should have those measures, yes, as school districts. Yeah. The feds shouldn't have to tell us to look at that, right, but that's something that we should be doing. And so I can see, regardless of what happens in the future, we're going to continue to focus on every student every day.
Right, yeah. Right. And the money should still flow. I don't think they're taking that away. At least we haven't heard that yet. Right. That's interesting. In fact, we had a conversation with you a while ago about getting some new playground equipment at Tatum to help some of the handicapped children that couldn't access some of the playground. Now that's coming now. That's been, I guess, approved, or it's on the way.
Yep, this summer.
This summer, nice. So it does work. Talk to the man, and it works. So, future of education, number one thing I'm going to talk to you about real quick, and then also we're going to talk about the real estate values and how they're impacted by a good school system here and all. But talk to me about the future of education. Where we're going to go in the future. Again, substituting for the 10 times I've did, or 12 times, and kindergarten. It seems like we're pushing a lot of papers at these young children, worksheet after worksheet after worksheet. And my fear was that we really, and again, I'm not an educator, as just a layman father coming in there. Do they understand what these worksheets mean? And is there a better way, maybe down the road, to get them more time outside, more time collaborating with their friends, talking, learning real life business models or friendship models than just paperwork after paperwork after paperwork? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to really address the whole child when you're talking about education. We have, as a nation, or in Florida as well, and in Sarasota is not immune to this, as we've been held really to this rigorous standards, and I think that's a great thing. We want kids to learn at the highest level, but the time constraints to make sure that kids are proficient, and kids, when they need remediation, are getting time for that, and then they need enrichment, they're getting time for that. It's like what comes off the plate, and unfortunately, sometimes it is some of the things that we do consider that whole child aspect, whether it's that physical, getting outside and just having unstructured play, recess, all of those things. Is where do you find time to get it all in? And so we've been created a pretty rigid schedule to try to make sure that we're building as much time in there. So we're mandated to have recess in every one of our elementary schools, 20 minutes daily. We have 150 minutes of PE per week in our elementary schools, but we want to ensure that kids are getting those, and we're not missing any of that mandated time. And so that's one of the things we did last year that kind of felt like, oh man, they're really kind of putting their thumb and micromanaging things, but it was really to build in these very important pieces that we know kids need. They need to have unstructured play. They need physical education. We still fight the whole battle of how much time in a day to get it done. You got to get that 90 minutes of literacy instruction. You got to get math in for a minimum of 60 minutes a day, right? More, really, truly, to get where you want to go. But then you have to address their individual needs through remediation or enrichment practices, and then art, and then music and then you got lunch, and then you got the bathroom.
Drama. And and again, when I plugged in it one day, and they had the substitute schedule, what to do per hour, what per day, whatever. I was like, wow. I mean, like I said, you had PE that day or specials or whatever for an hour and a half. Whatever. You had lunch, you had recess. Anything else that affected you in that day? Maybe you had some special teacher coming in to teach something unique. Your 6 hours a day was shot down to about 4, to maybe 3.5, to do these worksheets, to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, all the things that I realized how you've got to pump. At the same time, I sat back and looked at my kids and I said, "This is kindergarten." When I went to kindergarten, if we colored outside the lines, that was cool. Look at it. Now it's like, no, we got to get inside the lines, and not only that, but color by the numbers here. So number 1 is red, number 2 is this, and so you're learning maybe at a first or second grade level already in kindergarten. Where when I grew up, we didn't read in kindergarten.
No, the stakes are higher for sure.
Yes,
I will tell you, getting kids, and there's a lot of research that says that if a student is not reading at grade level by the 3rd grade, they are really, really set up for major challenges moving forward and beyond through the rest of their educational career. And so we take that very seriously. We want to make sure that students have the foundation at K1 and 2, and that has put a lot of rigor and expectation on our students that when you and I were in school, if we learned ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, we were doing pretty good.
Good to go.
The game has changed tremendously.
Is that because of a global level? Because they always say we're not number 1 in schools across the world. I don't know what the numbers are, 26th or 27th, whatever. But is that because of all the competition around the globe?
Yeah, I think research is beginning to unveil, what kids are capable of learning, and then of course with the competition around the nation and across the world of where we fall, we need to have some urgency, and we know again that kids can do it, but at what point do we begin to sacrifice the other pieces? Some of that social aspect and the things that they need to learn. those are critical pieces that we still focus on. Unfortunately, we are so limited in time, and that becomes the challenge. But yeah, kids are capable, and they can do it, and they can rise to the level with the right support.
Oh,
And
they
so,
can. Yes,
yeah.
it's amazing what you find out. And you have some of the advanced classes. My 7-year-old daughter is in the advanced program, the Eagle program at Tatum, and what she learned in kindergarten versus what my son's learning in the normal, average kindergarten is like a grade level different. So I'm glad you have those programs for the folks that kids who are a little bit more, advanced. And that's great. And I'm glad I got to see my son because I was like, boy, if that's advanced, what are they doing in an average old class that I used to attend? And even that is advanced. So they're really pushing these kids along, and I think it's great. And you're right, they can learn a whole lot more than we can imagine. And like I said, plugging in there on a 6-hour day, and I saw you don't have much time. You don't have much time to do all this. The other thought was when we started going paperless, because there's so much paper floating around. Teachers complaining they can't make enough copies, and they don't have a budget for copies. And then I thought, well, kindergarten kids need to color on paper and cut and paste. But after that, boy, that should be just about gone after maybe second grade.
Well, there's no replacement for paper, I can tell you. The ability to handwrite, to work out problems, to do your assignments, I think there's always going to be a place for that. But I do agree there needs to be a movement towards kind of a modernization of how we do education as well. So not to sacrifice, but just to understand that there's a blend of both, because we are functioning in a paperless world, and we need to know all the latest and greatest. And so we've introduced some new platforms within the school district to kind of help with those transitions. Just on paperwork, when you think about just field trip forms or permission slip forms for this or that, we've moved a lot of that electronically, just to help reduce some of that paperwork and the lost in translation when I forget to bring things home, to help with parents and getting those things submitted. Grades are electronic now. You can
go online and check.
You really don't even get a printed report card anymore. You can just go right online into the portal and you see it. But in the classroom, especially as you get up into the older grades, there's more electronic textbooks and interactive platforms the students can learn with versus just paper and pencil. But I don't think paper and pencil ever completely goes away.
Although cursive writing went away, I don't know why that ended. Why did that go away?
But it's actually making its way back.
Is it good?
There is a bill, I believe, right now in the legislature that was going to require it. Let's see if it makes its way through.
See,
but
I told you you're going to hear something today that you never knew. Because that's such a beautiful art form of writing. And
well, I got to tell you, I was surprised that even my own children, I was surprised I had them sign a check that they got for their birthday from their grandparent, and he didn't know how to sign it in cursive, and I was like, wow, we really have done a disservice. But I think it's going to make its way back for sure.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah. I'd love to see that. I mean, we learned, and you have that dotted line across your paper, and where to run these beautiful. It's just an art form, I think. It's really neat. So let's third grade. My wife told me something about third grade. I don't know if this is true or not, but she said that we can edit this if we need to. But the prison systems start looking at kids' test scores around third grade to figure out how many prisons they're going to need down the road. So if you have a lot of failing third and fourth graders around that age, that they're going to have a problem down the road. And you just kind of said something about third grade being a pivotal point. There might be some truth to that. I haven't looked at the numbers. I don't know. But have you ever heard anything about that, about third grade? You meant something there. But
I'm not sure about exactly how they use that to make those projections, but I could say there's got to be somewhat either, not maybe causation, but correlation of some sort of if students aren't successful in school, that can lead down
to other problems.
Can lead down a path that could eventually lead to legal issues. So I don't think there's a direct correlation, but I do believe that is probably an indicator there that is worthy of looking at. Because if kids aren't proficient, I heard of statistics, and don't quote me exactly, but large percentage of kids who are not proficient by third grade are not proficient by the 10th grade.
Yes.
So if they don't have it by the third grade, odds are they may not have it by the time they're in 10th grade. They just continue to fall behind as rigor increases and the complexity of the text that they're reading increases. It's just harder to catch up.
Yeah, you continue to fall behind. It's hard enough to stay on this. I remember that when I was in school, and I wish I could go back to school and redo it all now, because I went to school to just pass the courses and do what I have to do to get a B or maybe a C or whatever, but never really fully understanding it. Mm-hmm. And so then now you're a freshman in high school, and now you're a sophomore, but you didn't understand freshman too well, so you're struggling as a sophomore. And they build on each other. You're right. So it doesn't take long. By third grade, I guess you'd be slipping.
That's right.
Big time.
I would say my advice for students and for our parents is to read. I know we hear that a lot, but the importance of continuing to read and stretching yourself in reading. So as you become more comfortable reading, this lexile or this level of a book, push yourself to the next level and continue to do that and read multiple things, a variety of different topics. That's the best thing you can continue to do.
Wow. Yeah. So in real estate, it's location. And for schools, it's read. Amazing. The other thing I wanted to close on this, school quality and the impact it has on real estate. I ran across an article the other day that said it's a significant factor. And obviously, you look at some of the better school systems across the country, and the home values around there are usually pretty high. But a 5% increase in school test scores can lead to a 2.5% increase in property values.
I have heard that statistic.
You did?
I do, yeah, and I would agree with that. I think the stronger the school system and the more support provided by the community, just like here in Sarasota, the referendum I mentioned earlier, it just shows you, it's a demonstration of the commitment the community has. Obviously, this is a great place to live, but it's not a cheap place to live, right? I mean, the values in this community are strong, and the school district has a big part of that, and that's why we have to continue to invest in it. And it's just a privilege and an honor, and it's a huge responsibility for me as the superintendent to continue to make us better and greater each and every day, so that it impacts our entire community for, all around. And so I enjoy that. It's a big responsibility, but I'm very happy and very blessed to be in this role.
It's amazing, and you're doing a fantastic job. And I'm glad I took this time to research some of this stuff and find out not only is Florida a great, people moved here because it's warm. They want to get out of the north. It's warm. Maybe you moved here for political reasons, the beaches. But guess what? You just moved in to the #1 state in the country for education. And you've got the warmth and the beaches and Disney, and a great place to live. And so, yes, the home values are going to cost more. And when you wonder why in Sarasota the home prices are sky high, well, you also got, so not only the #1 state, but then the #1 county in that state with the #1 school system. So essentially, if I can pull out of this, that's the #1 county in the country. If we're #1 and that's #1, you get the #1 county in the country. Of course, home prices are going to be a little bit more than someplace else, because you have a great system here, not only in the schools, but the weather and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Amazing. Amazing job you've done. I think one day I have to run for school board. I think some of those are up pretty soon, aren't they? 2 or 3 of those?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years. I'm going to have to do that. But I'm so happy to have you on here, and so happy to learn more about you and the schools. And another way for me to plug in, and everything I found out was just amazing. And I'm here to help you, the teachers, this whole school system. And thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Terry Connor, Superintendent of Schools, Superman, I'll call him. Thank you so much.